In this video, we're going to talk about variables and their relationship with your custom commands and functions, because there's actually some very important things that you need to understand when you're working with variables in custom commands or functions. When we think of variables, you traditionally think about using the set command to set a variable. But if you've ever clicked on this advanced section, you can see that there's actually a parameter here called local or global. And for the most part, especially when you're a beginner, you just leave this to global and you probably never give it any thought. But this is actually super important when it comes to defining your own custom commands or functions. But from now on, I'm probably just going to say either custom commands or custom functions because I don't want to have to keep saying custom commands or functions. So this local or global is what's called the scope. And the scope is basically like a permission level, okay? So you can think of it like this. When something is global in scope, that means that everybody has permission to see it. Now, when something's local in scope, that means that only the custom command it's defined in can see it. And so anything outside of that custom command or function that you define the local variable in, it's not allowed to see that. And so for that reason, you also will not be able to see a local variable's value inside of the debugger. So that's really the difference between local and global. Global means everybody can see it. You can define it inside of a custom command or you can define it outside of a custom command. It doesn't matter. If you do that, everything can see it, whether it's inside of a custom command or function or not, and you can see the value in the debugger. So if I pull this up and just run this real quick, you'll see it says global variable, this is global. Now, let's go ahead and find local variable and run local variable. I run this and you can see nothing shows up here. And the reason for that is because this is local. Now, something you're going to see me doing is you're going to see me putting an underscore in front of my local variables. And the reason that I do that is because that way when I'm looking inside of the debugger, I can tell the difference between a global and a local variable. So if you see right here, there's a global variable. It says this is global, and there's no underscore in front of it. So I expect that I'll be able to see that value. But if I'm looking in the debugger and I see that there's an underscore in front of it, I know that it's going to be blank. And I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to think that there's something wrong. And so that is why you see me prefacing my local variables with the underscore. That's my naming convention. Do it however you want. But this is a pretty good one I found. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this code and then we can run the script. So first we're going to set this global variable here with the value, this is global. Then we're going to run this local variable example command here. So within this command, we're first going to set a local variable. We're then going to alert the values of both the global and local variables. And then after we run this custom command, we're then going to alert the value of the global and local variables again. So let's run this. We are now inside of the custom command. And as you can see, we see both values. This is global, this is local. And now when I hit OK, and we run this alert with the global and local variables, we only see this as global this time. And the reason is because this is defined within the custom command and its scope is local. And since we are now outside of that, we can no longer see the value of that variable. And if I pull this up again, you can see we still cannot see the value in the debugger, even though it's obviously been set. Okay, so that is very important to know, the difference between local and global and how it relates to custom commands and functions. The next thing I want to talk about are parameters, because parameters are essentially local variables that are used in order to pass data to that command. So in this case, we've created a custom command that says display name. And it takes in this parameter name. Now I put an underscore here because a parameter is actually a local variable. So if you wanted to change name, then you should keep it local within this custom command in this particular case. So if I wanted to set name to be something else, I would want to make sure that this is local, and I set the value as something else. But for now, we're going to run the command display name, and then we're going to try and use that parameter again, but outside of the custom command. So we get your name is Nick, and then we get an empty alert window. And of course, the reason is because the parameter is local to the custom command or function. Now, before we move on to the next example, there's one myth that I want to dispel, and that is the myth that a local variable is local to the thread. This is not true, and it's a mistake that I still to this day see people making. So if you thought that local variables were local to the thread, that is not true. They're actually local to the custom command or function in which they are defined. So don't fall into that trap. Don't make that mistake. Always remember, local means local to the command or function they're defined within. Okay, so now I want to talk about parameters in a slightly different way. So why do we use parameters? Why do we need to pass in this particular case, the name? Why can't I set a variable outside of here that says name? And the reason for that is because we want parameters to be able to take in data in a way that makes them reusable, not just from, say, one loop to the next, but actually in, say, like a multi-threaded environment where you couldn't actually set a global variable to, say, be a name, because a different thread might change that, right? And then you'd have corrupted data. And so we need the custom commands and functions to take in the parameters that they need, keep them local, and that way when we're multi-threading, first of all, it's going to be better for memory management, but second of all, it's going to ensure that your data is not being corrupted when you're multi-threading. So it's very important that any outside information that a custom command or function needs gets passed into it through the parameters. Even if you don't plan on multi-threading it, you should always do it this way because, again, it's better for memory management, and we'll talk about that in the memory management section. But it's better for that reason, but it's also better if you want to reuse the custom command or function, because that's one of the great benefits of creating these is you can copy them into another bot and they should be ready to go, especially if they're unit tested, which we'll talk about later. And finally, you may end up changing that program later to be multi-threaded. So it's very important that you pass the data in that you need. So let's look at an example of that, okay? So in this case, we're gonna create a tax calculating function. This function is gonna take in the price in the tax percentage. So we're gonna pretend that this tax calculator can be used by stores in any state in the United States, because our states have different tax rates, sales tax rates, depending on what state you're in, and sometimes even within the same state, depending where you're at, the sales tax may be different. Like where I live, for some reason, the sales tax on things in my city are actually different than they are in the rest of the state for some reason. Anyways, so we're creating a function that people can pass in the price in the tax percentage, and this is going to calculate the cost of the sales tax. So the way that's going to do that is it's going to take in the percentage, divide it by 100, and then it's going to multiply the price by the tax rate. So if the tax rate was 10%, it would divide it by 100, and you would get 0.1. And then if you multiplied that by, say, 10, then the answer would be 1. So the cost of the sales tax would be $1 in that case. So that's essentially what this function is doing. And so we don't want to hard code the tax percentage because it may change. And also we don't know the price of the item. And so that's why we need to use parameters in order to take this data in, okay? And you want this to be a single cohesive unit where this function could just be copied. It could be taken out of this bot and put into another one and it would just work. This is for your lowest level commands and functions I'm talking about. Sometimes you're going to have, in fact, a lot of times you're going to have commands and functions that do rely on others within your program to work. It's just a good way to structure your code. But your lowest level ones, they should be atomic units. They should be units that don't rely on anything else. So in this lowest level form, I could take this tax calculator and I could paste it in any bot and it'll work. And that is what you want to get to with your lowest level. We're going to talk about helper functions in the next video, and this is essentially what this is. This is a helper function that you could just copy and paste anywhere. Now, how are we going to use this? We're going to set the item price to be $100, and then we're going to use that same item price in 2 different states, and that's the reason that I'm setting it outside of these custom commands here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a command called purchase item in California. And we're going to set the sales tax in California to be 7.25. And then we're going to alert the sales tax in California cost. We're going to call our tax calculator with the item price, which we defined up here as $100. And then it's going to calculate the sales tax cost for the rate of 7.25%. Then we're going to do the same exact thing in Florida, except Florida's sales tax is only 6%. So let's go ahead and run this. So we get the sales tax in California is $7.25 for this $100 item. And then in Florida, the sales tax for this $100 item is $6. And that's how we can use parameters to get different results by passing in different data, but by reusing this exact same function. So that's everything that you need to know for now about variables and parameters, which are essentially local variables within custom commands and functions. So that's going to do it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.